Don't throw that away, sir. That one still works. The voice was small, calm, and so out of place beside the polished main stage that Ethan Caldwell almost kept walking. Almost. He stopped with one hand in the pocket of his tailored charcoal coat and turned toward the far corner of the Detroit Community Tech Fair, where the lights were dimmer and the floors smelled faintly of dust, hot plastic, and old cardboard. There, behind a folding table stacked with broken monitors and cracked laptops, stood a little black girl no older than 9, balanced on an upside-down milk crate like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her braids were tied back with fading blue beads. Her gray hoodie was 2 sizes too big. Her fingers were smudged dark with machine dust. In front of her sat the kind of junk Ethan's company threw out by the truckload every quarter. A dead Dell tower with the side panel missing. 2 keyboards with missing keys. A tangle of wires. A scratched-up monitor that looked like it had been dragged across concrete. Ethan glanced once, then gave the kind of smile rich men used when they wanted to appear amused instead of dismissive. "Sweetheart," he said, smooth and effortless, "that thing isn't worth 5 cents. Around him, the event staff laughed softly, not cruelly, just enough. His assistant Lauren Pierce lowered her tablet and followed his gaze. 2 teenage volunteers near the recycle bin paused mid-step. A camera operator from the local news crew shifted, sensing something unscripted. But the little girl didn't shrink. She didn't blush or stammer or look to an adult for rescue. She only tipped her chin up a fraction and looked straight at the machine as if Ethan Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Future Systems, billionaire genius of modern hardware, was the least interesting object in the room. "It's not dead," she said. "It's just mixed up." Ethan let out a breath through his nose. The phrase was so childlike, so strange, that it made one of the men behind him chuckle again. Mixed up. As if circuit boards had feelings. As if broken hardware simply needed encouragement. He was supposed to be on stage in under 4 minutes to announce a new education initiative. A glossy program, full of clean branding and bigger promises. A camera light blinked red near the podium. The banner. Above the stage read, "Building the Future for Every Child." And still, for some reason he couldn't explain, his eyes stayed on the girl in the corner. She had one hand on the open computer tower and the other gripping a yellow-handled screwdriver, so worn the black rubber had peeled from the middle. On the table beside her lay tiny neat rows of salvaged screws, sorted by size. Not scattered. Sorted. That registered. So did the way she examined the inside of the machine with no wasted movement, no random poking, no showmanship. She looked like someone listening to a language no one else could hear. "Ava," a woman called from across the aisle, her voice thin with worry. Ethan turned and saw her then. The mother, maybe early 30s, exhausted in the way poverty made people look older than the calendar did. She wore grocery store sneakers and a faded green work jacket with one elbow widening at the seam. She stood near the public check-in desk, clutching a paper wristband and a tote bag that looked heavier than it should have been. "Don't bother those people, baby." The girl, Ava, didn't answer right away. Her eyes were on the tower. Her mouth moved once, quietly counting under her breath. Then she leaned in and connected a loose cable with a gentle, certain click. "I'm not bothering him," she said. "I'm fixing the part they missed." That changed the air. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The room didn't go loud. It went still. Not with drama. With attention. Real attention. His lead engineer, Ryan Cole, who had been standing near the stage arguing with a production tech over the frozen presentation system, turned his head. Lauren's brows lifted. Even the camera operator took one step closer without meaning to. Ethan's smile thinned. "They missed," he repeated. Ava nodded toward the sleek demo station by the stage, the one wrapped in branded vinyl and fed by hidden power cables under black tape. Its screen had been flickering for the last 10 minutes, then cutting to black for no obvious reason. Ryan had blamed the venue's wiring. The venue had blamed the software team. A vendor had blamed the age of the backup unit. But now this child, in an oversized hoodie, standing on a milk crate beside a pile of discarded hardware, had said they missed something in the tone people used. When they were not guessing, Ethan took a slow step toward her. The polished soles of his shoes clicked against the concrete. "And what exactly," he asked, his voice still calm, still expensive, "did we miss?" Ava looked up then. Her face was young enough to still be soft around the cheeks, but her eyes were steady in a way that didn't belong to most adults, let alone a 9-year-old. Behind her, The old monitor gave a low electric hum. You paired an old power unit with a newer board, she said. It keeps trying to protect itself, so it shuts the screen down before the load settles. That's why it flashes first. Ethan said nothing. Ryan frowned from across the aisle, already moving toward them. Lauren lowered her tablet completely now. Somewhere behind Ethan, the stage manager whispered that they needed him up front. He didn't move. He just stared at the little girl, the scrap on the table, the dead monitor that suddenly didn't seem dead at all. And then Ava pressed the power button. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the battered tower breathed to life with a soft mechanical whir, the fan rattling once before smoothing out, and the cracked monitor glowed pale blue in the dim corner like a secret waking up. The glow from the cracked monitor painted the side of Ava's face in cold blue light, and for a moment no one in the corner of the hall seemed to breathe. The old tower gave a low steady hum, not pretty, not quiet, but alive, and that alone felt strange enough to pull the whole room a few inches off balance. Ethan Caldwell stared at the screen as lines of startup text rolled upward in neat white rows. It was not a lucky flicker. It was not a broken machine coughing out one last spark. It was a working computer built from pieces his company would have written off without a second glance. Ryan Cole stepped in fast now, his badge swinging against his blazer, his expression tightening the closer he got. He looked at the open side panel, then at the salvaged components spread across the table, then at Ava. Who touched this? He asked. Ava did not flinch. She reached down, lifted a loose cable between 2 fingers, and set it gently aside. I did, she said. Ryan glanced at Ethan. Then back at the machine. You got this to post? Yes, sir. By yourself? Ava nodded once. Ethan said nothing. The corner of the tech fair had changed in the last 30 seconds. It was still the same folding tables, the same dusty bins marked donation, repair, and recycle. The same smell of plastic warming under old bulbs, but now people were drifting toward it without meaning to. A volunteer with a clipboard stopped pretending not to stare. 2 middle school boys in matching robotics team shirts edged closer with open mouths. Even the local reporter near the stage had turned her camera halfway around. The polished center of the event, the banners and podium and sleek demo station, suddenly felt too bright and too rehearsed. This corner felt real. Ava. Her mother had made her way over now, clutching that heavy tote bag against her side like she was trying to make herself smaller than the moment growing around her. Monica Brooks wore the strained expression of someone used to apologizing before anything even happened. Baby, come on now. We do not need to make trouble. I am not making trouble, Ava said softly, still watching the screen. I am showing them. Monica gave a tired half-smile that never reached her eyes. Showing them what? Ava pointed toward the main demo station near the stage. It had gone dark again. One of the event staff slapped the side of the display in frustration while another crouched near the cable run. A few people in the audience had started murmuring. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. He had built his life on avoiding moments like this, moments where the image cracked before the speech began. He was a man who controlled rooms, markets, headlines. Yet now a 9-year-old girl in a faded hoodie was standing 3 yards from him with a steadier pulse than anyone on his staff. It is the same problem, Ava said. Ryan gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. No, it is not. That is a custom unit. Ava turned toward him for the first time. Her face stayed open, respectful, almost gentle, but her voice did not wobble. Custom does not mean right. The words landed harder than they should have from a child. Ethan saw Ryan's expression shift, just slightly, from dismissal to irritation. Listen, Ryan said, lowering his voice the way adults do when they assume authority alone should solve things. I have been building systems longer than you have been alive. Ava blinked once. Yes, sir. But this one still shuts itself down. A few people nearby smiled before they could stop themselves. Ethan noticed. He also noticed something else, something smaller and sharper. On the table beside the open tower, Ava had arranged every salvage part with care. Screws lined by size. Ram sticks stacked cleanly. A chipped ceramic bowl holding adapters and jumpers. There was no chaos in her work, only scarcity managed with precision. It reminded him, unpleasantly, of his own first years, when he had been brilliant and broke and too hungry to waste motion. That memory came and went so quickly, he almost resented it. Lauren stepped closer to him and kept her voice low. The board members are seated. They are asking if we are delaying. Ethan did not look at her. We are not delaying. The screen is down again. I can see that. On the far side of the aisle, the stage manager lifted both hands in a question. Ethan ignored him. Ryan folded his arms. All right, he said to Ava, in the tone of a man indulging something he expected to fail. Tell me what is wrong with the demo unit. Ava looked toward the dark screen, then toward the cable path taped along the concrete, then toward the backup power box sitting half-hidden behind a draped table leg. Her eyes narrowed, not dramatically, just enough to show she was lining the pieces up in her head. The room waited. The whole fair seemed to tip quietly in her direction. Monica's hand tightened around the tote bag straps. Ethan could hear the faint tick of the giant countdown clock near the stage. 2 minutes until his speech. A child from the robotics team whispered, "She knows." Ava stepped down from the milk crate, her sneakers hitting the concrete with a light scuff, and pointed toward the blackout screen without hesitation. Your new board is pulling from an old backup unit that cannot keep up, she said. It is trying to start too clean, so the safety cutoff keeps killing the display before the power settles. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. Ethan looked from the girl to the demo station and felt a strange sensation he had not felt in years. Not embarrassment. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Recognition. Ryan did not answer right away. He crossed the aisle toward the stage unit with the stiff, controlled pace of a man trying not to look rattled in public, and the crowd moved with him like iron filings pulled by a magnet. Ethan followed more slowly, his expression unreadable now, the easy amusement gone from his face. Ava stayed where she was for half a second, one hand resting on the edge of the scrap-built tower, until Monica touched her sleeve. "Baby," her mother whispered, "that is enough." But Ava was already looking past her, eyes fixed on the glossy black casing beneath the stage monitor, on the taped cables, on the little blinking backup box tucked under the table skirt like something no one thought a child would notice. "It is not enough if they still do not see it," she said, and though her voice remained soft, it carried just far enough to make Monica fall quiet. At the front of the hall, Ryan dropped to one knee beside the demo unit and pulled back the drape. He checked the cable line first, then the backup power box, then the board connection panel. His hand slowed. Ethan noticed that. Lauren noticed it too. The stage manager stopped speaking into his headset mid-sentence. The giant countdown screen above the podium flashed 1 minute, then 59 seconds. Ava stepped closer, careful now, not rushing, her small sneakers whispering against the concrete floor. Nobody stopped her. That was the first shift. 30 seconds ago she had been the child near the recycle bins. Now even the adults seemed unsure who had the right to tell her where to stand. Ryan looked up at Ethan. "It is possible," he said, which was not an admission, not fully, but it was the first crack. Ava stood beside the edge of the stage and pointed toward the power box without touching it. "That unit is older than the board you installed," she said. "When the load jumps, it tries to protect the screen by cutting the signal first." Ryan frowned. "That is not how the sequence is supposed to work." Ava nodded. "No, sir. But that is what it is doing." Ethan looked from Ryan to the black screen above them, then back to the little girl with the blue beads at the ends of her braids. There was nothing dramatic in her posture. No triumph. No performance. She was not trying to embarrass anyone. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Children usually wanted praise when they were right. Adults wanted credit. This girl wanted the machine to stop lying. One of the board members in the front row rose halfway from his chair. "Ethan," he said under his breath, "the press is filming this." Ethan barely turned his head. "Then let them film." Ryan reached behind the power unit and tested the connection path again. His mouth tightened. Then he stood, pulled a flashlight from his jacket pocket, and shined it into the back panel. Dust glinted. A cable had been seated into an adapter that was too old by at least 2 generations. Clean enough to pass at a glance. Wrong enough to fail under load. Ryan exhaled once, slowly. She is right. It was not loud, but the words moved through the room like cold air under a door. The reporter's camera came up fully now. The robotics kids stared at Ava with open awe. Monica pressed her lips together, one hand rising to cover her mouth for just a second before she lowered it again. Ethan said nothing. He only looked at the panel, then at Ava, and something sharp turned over inside him. It was not just that she had found the problem. It was where she had found it from. A child in a dim corner, working from scraps. While his staff, his engineers, his polished event team had circled the failure without seeing it. Ryan turned back toward Ava, and for the first time his voice lost its edge. How did you catch it that fast? Ava looked at the dead screen, then at the lit scrap monitor still glowing behind her across the hall. Because broken things tell the truth faster, she said. New things still try to look impressive. No one laughed this time. Ethan felt those words land somewhere deeper than they should have. Build the future for every child. The banner above his head still read in clean white letters against bright blue vinyl. He had approved that phrase himself. He had shaken hands beside it, smiled beside it, funded interviews beneath it. Yet standing there in the hard light of the stage, with a failed system at his back and a 9-year-old girl, calmly exposing what his people missed, the slogan suddenly felt thin. Too polished. Too easy. Lauren stepped to his side, keeping her voice careful. We can swap the unit and delay 7 minutes. Ethan's gaze remained on Ava. Do it. Ryan was already moving, calling for a replacement power source. Volunteers ran. Cables were pulled. The room woke back up into motion. But Ethan did not move with it. He stood still while Ava turned and walked back toward her scrap-built machine in the corner, as if what had just happened did not belong to her anymore. As if she had only borrowed the room long enough to correct it. He watched her climb back onto the milk crate, reach for a small Phillips screwdriver, and continue tightening a salvaged bracket no one else in the world would have cared about. That was when the second realization hit him, quieter and far more troubling than the first. She had not been trying to impress him. She had been trying to save something everyone else had already decided was not worth saving. By the time the replacement unit was brought in, the room had split into two kinds of silence. One was practical, filled with the quick shuffle of cables, clipped instructions, and the soft panic of people trying to fix a mistake before it looked like one. The other was heavier. It sat in the space around Ava Brooks like a new kind of gravity. People did not know what to do with a child who had just been right in front of all of them. So they watched. Some with curiosity, some with discomfort, a few with something close to shame. Ava stayed on the milk crate and worked with the patient focus of someone who had learned early that attention never lasted, so the work mattered more. She slid a salvaged memory stick into place, tightened one loose bracket, then brushed a grain of dust from the motherboard with the edge of her sleeve. The battered monitor beside her glowed steadily now, its cracked lower corner catching the overhead light like a thin line of ice. Monica stood a few feet away, still clutching the tote bag against her hip, but her breathing had changed. It was slower now, steadier, though the worry had not left her face. Worry like that did not leave all at once. It had lived there too long. Ethan Caldwell remained near the stage longer than he should have. Ryan and the event crew moved around him, replacing the old backup unit, testing connections, speaking in the careful technical language people used when they were trying to sound composed in front of authority. The screen came back once, flickered, then held. Lauren stepped to Ethan's side again. You need to go up now, she said quietly. We are already 6 minutes behind. Ethan looked toward the podium, the rows of seated donors, the banner stretched high above them in perfect branding blue. Then he looked back to the corner. Start the introduction video, he said. Lauren blinked. Without you. I said start it. She nodded and moved away. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his coat, but instead of heading for the stage, he crossed the aisle toward Ava. The crowd noticed immediately. It rippled through them in tiny shifts of posture and gaze. Monica saw him coming and straightened instinctively, one hand sliding to Ava's shoulder like she was preparing to apologize for something that had not happened yet. Ethan stopped in front of them, close enough now to see the worn threads at the cuffs of Ava's hoodie and the tiny silver flecks of machine dust caught in the creases of her fingers. He also noticed the tote bag at Monica's side had a public library logo printed on it in faded red ink. The top was open just enough for him to glimpse what was inside. 3 books. One on beginner coding. One on hardware repair. One on electrical systems written for high school students. Corners softened from use. He looked at Ava's machine. What are you building? He asked. Ava did not look up right away. She finished tightening the screw first, then set the screwdriver down with care. A computer, she said. Ethan almost smiled at the obviousness of it, but something in her face stopped him. I can see that. I mean, why this one? Ava finally met his eyes. Up close. Her gaze was even steadier than he remembered. Not challenging, just clear. Because my mom needs one. Monica's fingers tightened on the tote strap. Ava. It is okay. Ava said softly, still looking at Ethan. You asked. Ethan felt something inside him shift again. A small, unpleasant movement, like pride rubbing against truth. Needs one for. What? Ava turned to the monitor and tapped the edge of the casing lightly. Job applications. The library computers log you out too fast. And the good ones are always taken after school. Monica let out a quiet breath, the kind people make when they want to interrupt, but are too tired to rearrange reality for someone else's comfort. Ethan glanced at her, and for the first time since he had stopped in that corner, he really saw her. The grocery store shoes. The worn jacket. The look of someone who had spent years stretching every dollar until it felt like a moral failing when it did not stretch far enough. I work evenings, Monica said, almost reluctantly. Home health. By the time I get off, the library is closed. She wanted to build one from the recycle bins. Ethan looked back at the machine. It was not pretty. It had mismatched panels, one missing rubber foot, and a fan grill bent slightly inward. But it was alive. Useful. Salvaged into purpose by a child who had no reason to trust waste as anything but final. On the stage behind him, the introduction video had begun to play, his own voice booming warmly through the hall about innovation, access, and the promise of tomorrow. The irony hit him so sharply, he almost turned around to shut it off himself. Ava reached into a cardboard box beside her and pulled out a small hard drive wrapped in anti-static plastic. She held it like something precious. I found this one last week, she said. It still spins. Ethan frowned slightly. Last week, Monica answered this time. She comes here after school some days. The volunteers let her sort the parts nobody wants. Ethan said nothing. Nobody wants. The words settled hard. Around them, the fair continued in motion, but softer now, farther away, as if the bright polished event had drifted to the background, and this corner had become the real center of the room. Ava slid the hard drive onto the table, lining it up with the other parts in one neat row. Then she said the thing that stopped Ethan colder than anything else that afternoon. You throw away better computers than we have at school. The words did not sound accusing coming from Ava. That was what made them harder to escape. She said them the way children said weather. As something plain and visible, something any honest person should be able to recognize on sight. Ethan Caldwell stood in the thin wash of light spilling from the battered monitor and looked at the girl, then at the hard drive she had lined up so carefully on the folding table, then at the library books in Monica's tote bag. Behind him, his own voice was still drifting from the stage speakers, warm and polished and confident, talking about expanding access, empowering young minds, transforming futures. It was the kind of voice that sounded good inside a ballroom, on a podcast, in a fundraising clip. But here, beside a milk crate and a pile of discarded parts, it sounded strangely far away. Ethan lowered his eyes to the open tower again. The case had been pieced together from mismatched screws and patience. One panel sat a little crooked. The fan housing had been cleaned so thoroughly, it looked touched by care rather than maintenance. Nothing about it was elegant. Everything about it was intentional. Where did you learn to do this? He asked. Ava shrugged lightly, as if the answer should have been obvious. The library. Videos when the internet works. Manuals people leave in the bins. Sometimes the old repair guy on Gresham lets me watch through the window if I stay quiet. Monica exhaled through her nose, weary but almost smiling now. She means Mr. Alvarez. He owns a phone shop. He says she notices things too fast. Ava reached for the small hard drive again, turning it over in her fingers with the reverence other children gave trophies. Most people stop looking when something still looks expensive, she said. But broken things tell on themselves if you wait. Ethan did not answer. He was still hearing that sentence from a few minutes ago. Broken things tell the truth faster. There had been a time, long before private jets and boardrooms and interviews under studio lighting, when he might have understood that instinct immediately. Back when he had been a scholarship kid with one pair of decent shoes and a habit of taking apart radios just to understand why the sound failed. He had built his first server rack in a garage that smelled like oil and wet cement. He had slept under a desk once because the heating in his apartment cut out in January in the office. Server room was warm. He had not thought about those years in a long time. Success had sanded them down, polished them into origin story anecdotes. But here, in this corner, With dust hanging in the air and the sharp scent of old circuits warming under strain, memory came back with its edges intact. Lauren reappeared at his side, moving carefully as though she could feel the pressure in the room changing shape. "The replacement is stable," she said quietly. "The board wants to know if you are still taking questions after the keynote." Ethan kept his eyes on Ava's machine. "Push the panel discussion 20 minutes. Lauren hesitated. "Ethan." He turned just enough to look at her. "Do it." She nodded and stepped away. Monica watched that exchange with the guarded expression of someone who had seen powerful people make promises before and knew the difference between a pause and a change. Ava, however, did not seem impressed at all. She had already gone back to work. She slid the hard drive into the bay with both hands, careful and exact, then checked the connector twice before fastening it down. Ethan noticed the small bite mark on the eraser end of the pencil tucked behind her ear. He noticed that her sleeves had been pushed up unevenly, one higher than the other. He noticed that for all the attention around her, she had not once asked for a photograph, a handshake, or a prize. Ryan approached from the stage, slower this time, carrying none of the defensiveness he had worn earlier. In one hand, he held the outdated adapter they had removed from the demo unit. He looked at Ava before speaking, and when he did, his voice had changed. "You were right about the cutoff sequence," he said. "We should have seen it." Ava nodded once, as if this were simply a fact returning to the surface where it belonged. Ryan looked at Ethan, then back at the table. "She rebuilt that from the scrap bins." Monica answered before Ava could. "Over 3 Saturdays and 2 evenings. We do not have internet at home right now, so she writes notes on paper before we leave the library." Ethan's gaze dropped to the books again, then to a spiral notebook half hidden under the cardboard box of parts. Its cover was bent. The edges were worn white. He picked it up, gently, waiting half a second to see if Ava objected. She did not. Inside, each page was filled with tight, careful handwriting, diagrams of boards, pin layouts, arrows, questions in the margins, words copied from manuals and translated into simpler language a child could use later. One page read, "If it still spins, do not assume it is safe. Test slow." Another read, "School computers freeze when too many tabs open because they do not have enough memory, not because kids are doing something wrong." Ethan stared at that line a moment longer than the others. Then he turned one more page and found a list titled "Things Adults Throw Away Too Early." At the top was a hard drive. Under that, a monitor cable. Under that, old batteries. And beneath them, written in smaller letters as if it mattered most, "Kids who learn different." Ethan closed the notebook slowly. The fair noise around them seemed to recede again. The bright branding, the donors, the repaired stage, all of it drifting to the edges while one child's handwriting sat heavier in his hands than any investor briefing ever had. Ava looked up at him then, not nervous, not hopeful, just waiting to see whether he would understand what he was holding. For the first time that afternoon, Ethan realized the machine in front of him was not the real thing she had built. The real thing was evidence. For a long second, Ethan Caldwell held the notebook in both hands, as if it might weigh more if he opened it again. The pages were ordinary. Cheap paper, bent corners, pencil notes pressed hard enough to leave grooves on the next sheet. But there was nothing ordinary about what sat inside them. Ava had not just been fixing broken machines. She had been building a map through a world designed to ignore her. Around them, the event had found its rhythm again. The repaired stage screen glowed bright and flawless now. Music swelled softly through the hall. Volunteers guided donors back to their seats. Somewhere near the entrance, someone laughed too loudly, trying to smooth over the tension that had embarrassed the wrong people. But here in the salvage corner, the air still felt different. Thicker. Truer. Ethan lowered the notebook and looked at Ava. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. Ava wiped her fingertips on her hoodie, before reaching for a cable tie. "Since 3rd grade, she said. That was when the computer lab at school started breaking all the time. And no one taught you." "Not really." She tilted her head a little, thinking. "Sometimes people answer questions if I ask the right one." Monica gave a tired little smile at that, the first real one Ethan had seen on her face all afternoon. "She means she asks so many questions people either help her or give up." Ava did not smile back. She was busy lining up a loose SATA cable so it would not pinch when the case closed. Ethan noticed she never forced anything. Every movement was patient. Every choice had purpose. It was the kind of restraint many engineers never learned because they had always had enough parts to replace whatever they damaged. Ava worked like someone who understood there might not be another chance. Ryan remained nearby, still holding the old adapter they had removed from the stage unit. He turned it over once in his hand, then looked at Ethan. "We had newer inventory in the truck," he said quietly. "This should not have been installed." Ethan heard the sentence for what it was. Not information. Confession. Not just from Ryan, but from the whole polished machine around them. Corners cut. Details missed. Things signed off because they looked good enough under bright lights. Ethan glanced toward the stage where his name still stretched across a giant screen in crisp white letters. For the first time in years, that name did not feel like proof. It felt like distance. Lauren returned with a slim black folder tucked under one arm and her phone in the other hand. "The panel is moved," she said. "The donors are staying. The press is asking about the girl." Monica stiffened at once. Ava kept working. Ethan looked at Lauren. "They do not talk to her." "Understood." Lauren hesitated, then added, "There is something else." She opened the folder and slid out a single printed sheet. "When Ryan flagged the issue, I had our community team pull records from our school access initiative. I searched the zip code tied to the public library branch on Monica's bag." Ethan took the page. It was a simple grant summary for Eastbrook District Schools. Device renewal, limited distribution, phased replacements, donation review pending. Numbers, categories, dates. Normal on the surface. Then his eyes landed on the line that mattered. Decommissioned Caldwell units held in storage pending disposal authorization. Quantity, 214. He looked up slowly. Storage. Lauren nodded. In a warehouse 12 miles from Ava's school. Monica frowned. Storage for what? No one answered right away. Ethan read the line again, as if it might become less obscene the second time. 214 machines. Not cutting edge. Not glamorous. But far better than the freezing, failing computers kids were still using in classrooms a few miles away. Better than the machines being dragged to scrap bins where a 9-year-old child had to rescue them one component at a time. Ava finally looked up from the table. Her eyes moved from Ethan's face to the paper in his hand. "What does it say?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. It was a rare feeling for him, not having language ready. He had spoken before Congress. He had closed 8-figure deals without notes. He had turned disaster into headlines and headlines into stock jumps. But this required a different kind of honesty, and that was a language Power often forgot how to speak. Monica's voice came softer now, more cautious. "Is there a problem?" Ethan looked at her, then at Ava, then back at the page. "There should not be," he said. "But there is." Ava stepped down from the milk crate. She was so small standing there on the concrete, and somehow that made the moment heavier, not lighter. "Is that why our school still has the old ones?" she asked. Ethan did not answer directly because the truth had become too plain to hide inside corporate wording. Instead, he asked Lauren, "How many replacement requests did Eastbrook file?" Lauren checked her phone. 3 in 14 months. All marked under review. No final distribution. Ryan went still beside them. Monica blinked once, slowly, as if she had reached the point where disappointment no longer surprised her enough to show on her face. Ava looked toward the stage, then back at the scrap-built computer glowing on the table. "So the good ones were close," she said. "They just never came." No one corrected her. No one could. The hum of the battered tower seemed louder suddenly. Its fans spinning with a thin persistent were like proof that effort had been forced to grow where support should have existed. Ethan folded the paper once, then again, careful not to crease it too hard. His expression did not change much, but something in him had. Lauren saw it first. Ryan saw it next. Monica saw it too, though she did not trust it yet. Ava only watched. "Where is the warehouse?" Ethan asked. Lauren answered at once. "River Point Industrial Park. Bay 7. Ethan slipped the folded paper into his coat pocket and looked at the time glowing on the countdown screen near the stage. The keynote was supposed to begin. The donors were waiting. The cameras were ready. But all of that now felt like theater built around the wrong center. He looked at Ava's hands, at the pencil still tucked behind her ear, at the notebook on the table, at the machine she had brought back from other people's neglect. Then he said the one thing no one in his company expected to hear that day. "Cancel the panel. I am not going back on that stage." The words landed so quietly that at first several people near the stage thought they had heard him wrong. Cancel the panel. I am not going back on that stage. The giant screen behind the podium still glowed with his name in tall white letters, clean and certain, while the room itself seemed to hesitate around the sentence like it had struck something solid in midair. Lauren was the first to recover. She touched the earpiece at her collar and turned away at once, her voice low, controlled, already relaying changes to the event team. Ryan stayed where he was, the outdated adapter still in his hand, his expression fixed somewhere between disbelief and dawning comprehension. Monica did not move at all. She looked at Ethan the way tired people look at sudden kindness, not ready to trust it because trust had a cost, and she had paid too much already. Ava stood beside the folding table with one hand resting on the edge of the open computer case, waiting. Not hopeful, not afraid. Waiting to see whether this was another grown-up moment that sounded important and vanished by sunset. Ethan looked toward the stage one last time. The donors sat in neat rows under cool white lights. The press cameras remained pointed forward out of habit, though a few were beginning to shift toward him. The banner over the hall still promised futures, access, opportunity. He had helped build an empire out of language like that. Crisp words, beautiful decks, clean launches. And for years he had believed results lived close enough to rhetoric that the distance hardly mattered. But now the distance had a face. 9 years old. Blue beads at the ends of her braids. Dust on her hands. He turned back to Lauren as she returned. Tell security the press does not follow us, he said. Us? She asked. Ethan nodded toward Monica and Ava. I am going to the warehouse. Monica blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. Now. Ethan looked at her. Now. A beat passed. The fair hummed around them with the brittle energy of a plan unraveling in public. Somewhere near the entrance, someone from the board began objecting in a low, urgent voice. Another staff member hurried past with a binder held against his chest. But the salvage corner remained strangely still, as if all the noise knew not to cross into it. Monica shifted the tote bag higher on her shoulder. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully. With respect, I have to work tonight. I cannot just ride around the city because somebody feels bad for 5 minutes. The sentence was polite, but there was steel in it. Ethan noticed. So did Ava. He answered without offense, which surprised even him. That is fair. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a card, and wrote a number on the back with Lauren's pen. If this takes more than an hour, my office pays for the missed shift. Monica did not take the card right away. And tomorrow? Ethan held her gaze. If I leave this unfinished tomorrow, you should never believe another word I say. Ava looked from her mother to Ethan and then toward the repaired stage screen. Why not just tell them from up there? She asked. The question cut cleaner than any accusation could have. Ethan glanced at the podium, at the perfect lighting, the polished confidence waiting for him like a habit. Then he looked back at Ava. Because if I stand up there right now, he said, it will sound like a speech. Ava considered that. Then she gave a small nod, as if he had finally answered correctly for the first time all afternoon. Ryan stepped forward. I should come, he said. Ethan turned to him. Why? Ryan glanced at the adapter in his hand, then at the floor, then at Ava's machine glowing in the corner. Because this passed through my team. And because she should not be the only person in this room willing to look directly at what we missed. Ethan studied him for half a second, then nodded once. Fine. Lauren had already begun moving with the speed of someone whose calm sharpened under pressure. She was calling for cars, rerouting staff, sending terse messages to legal, operations, and community outreach. The board members near the front row were no longer trying to hide their frustration. One of them started toward Ethan, face tight with controlled anger, but Lauren intercepted him before he reached the aisle. Ethan barely noticed. His attention was on Ava as she carefully closed the side panel of the rebuilt computer and pressed it into place with both palms. The casing clicked shut. She stood back and looked at it for a second, not proud exactly, just making sure it was stable before leaving it. Then she unplugged the monitor, wrapped the cord in a neat loop, and placed the notebook on top of the tower as if all of it belonged together. Evidence and effort. Thought and proof. Monica watched her daughter with a look Ethan could not name at first, something deeper than pride and more tired than relief. Then he recognized it. It was what hope looked like when it had learned not to make noise. Can I bring it? Ava asked quietly, resting her fingers on the edge of the case. Ethan looked toward the stage, toward the donors, the cameras, the polished spectacle that had almost swallowed this day whole. Then back at the machine, made from things his company had called obsolete. Yes, he said. Bring all of it. And as they started toward the side exit under the harsh fluorescent lights, with the crowd parting in uncertain silence and the cold Detroit evening waiting beyond the glass doors, Ethan realized the next move would not shock the board, or the press, or even the city most of all. It would shock the man he had been that morning. The cold hit first. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the hard, clean bite of a Detroit evening pressing through the open side doors as they stepped out of the convention center and into the fading light. The sky was the color of brushed steel. Traffic moved in long, dull ribbons beyond the parking lot. Ava carried the rebuilt computer with both arms wrapped around the case, the notebook balanced on top, while Monica held the monitor against her hip and kept glancing toward the bus stop across the street, as if part of her still expected this whole detour to collapse into inconvenience. Ethan's black SUV was already waiting at the curb, engine running, headlights cutting pale lines across the pavement. A second vehicle pulled up behind it for Lauren and Ryan. Security stood back, discreet now, following instructions. No cameras, no press, no polished statements. Just the low rumble of idling engines and the sound of winter air moving through the gaps between buildings. Ethan opened the rear door himself. Monica noticed that. Her expression did not soften, but something in it changed by a fraction. Ava paused beside the open door and looked into the leather interior, then down at her sneakers, then back at the computer in her arms. "Can I put it on the seat?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "It goes wherever you want it to go." Ava climbed in carefully and settled the case beside her as if it were a person that deserved elbow room. Monica got in after her, still holding the monitor. Ethan slid in across from them. The door shut with a soft, expensive thud that made the city outside feel suddenly farther away. For a moment no one spoke. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar, clean fabric, and the coffee Lauren always forgot in the front cup holder when days went sideways. Ava ran one finger over the edge of the notebook on her lap. Monica looked out the tinted window as downtown lights drifted across the glass like reflections that did not belong to them. Ethan gave the driver the warehouse address, and the SUV pulled away from the curb in a smooth, quiet glide that felt almost unnatural after the concrete, dust, and fluorescent hum of the tech fair. "How far is it?" Ava asked. "About 12 miles, Ethan said. "Maybe 25 minutes with traffic." Ava nodded once. "That is close." The words landed softly, but they stayed in the air. Close. Close enough for a truck. Close enough for a promise. Close enough to be insulting. Monica did not look at Ethan. When she spoke, "You said there were over 200 computers sitting there?" Ethan answered honestly. "That is what the record shows." "And nobody noticed?" He looked out at the passing buildings, the brick walls darkened by age, the storefront churches, the check-cashing places, the bus shelters where people hunched into coats against the cold. "Somebody noticed," he said after a moment. "They just did not act." Monica finally turned toward him then. "That is worse." He nodded. "Yes." In the second SUV behind them, Lauren was already sending messages that would make people nervous before they even reached the warehouse. Operations, inventory, legal, school partnerships, compliance. Words that usually moved in long, slow loops were moving fast tonight, because truth had entered the system through a door no one had been watching. Ryan called once from the car behind to confirm the storage bay number and stayed on speaker just long enough for Ava to hear his voice. "I checked the old deployment notes," he said. "Those units were pulled for a branding refresh, not because they were unusable." Ava leaned slightly toward the phone. "What is a branding refresh?" Ryan was quiet for half a beat. "It means they were no longer new enough to look impressive." Ava looked down at the notebook in her lap. "But they were still good enough to work." No one answered because there was no version of the sentence that sounded better out loud. The SUV rolled north through blocks that changed by degrees. The polished downtown towers gave way to wholesale buildings, then older storefronts, then long stretches of chain-link fencing and loading docks under sodium lights. Ethan watched the city move past the window and felt something he had spent years training himself out of. Exposure. Not public exposure. Moral exposure. The kind that stripped every elegant explanation down to the beam underneath. He thought of the keynote he had not given. He thought of the applause he had expected. He thought of the banner over the stage and the practiced warmth in his own recorded voice. Then he looked across at Ava, who had already opened her notebook again and was writing something in the margin of an earlier page with the chewed pencil she kept behind her ear. "What are you writing?" he asked. Ava did not stop moving the pencil. "Questions." "About what?" She glanced up. "How many schools? How old the computers are? Who said no? Why?" Monica gave a tired little breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though it held no amusement. "That is how she is. She does not stop at one question if the answer is lazy." Ethan looked at the notebook page. Her handwriting was tight and neat, even in the moving car. Under the new questions, she had written one more line by itself. "If the answer is complicated, follow the boxes." Ethan felt that one too. Outside, the industrial district thickened around them, all metal siding, empty lots, and warehouse roofs holding onto the last gray light of evening. The driver slowed and turned into River Point Industrial Park, tires humming over patched asphalt. Bay numbers slid past the windows in white block paint. 4, 5, 6. Then Bay 7 appeared under a flickering exterior light, the numbers half-shadowed above a wide steel roll-up door. A chain-link gate stood open. One security lamp buzzed overhead. The warehouse itself was plain, almost anonymous, the kind of building people forgot as soon as they drove by. Ethan stared at it for a second longer than he expected. 12 miles from Ava's school. 12 miles from classrooms where computers froze if too many tabs opened. 12 miles from a child rebuilding a future from scrap. The SUV stopped. No one reached for the door immediately. Ava looked out the window at the silent building, then at Ethan. "Are they really all in there?" she asked. Ethan held her gaze. "We are about to find out." The security light above Bay 7 buzzed with a thin electric sound that seemed louder because everything else was so still. Ethan opened the SUV door first, and cold air poured in at once, carrying the smell of damp concrete, diesel, and metal left too long in winter air. Ava stepped out carefully with the notebook tucked under one arm and looked up at the warehouse like it was a locked answer. Monica followed with the monitor pressed against her coat, her shoulders drawn tight against the cold. Ryan climbed out of the second vehicle already scanning the loading area, while Lauren was on her phone again, confirming access, identities, timestamps. The building did not look important. That was part of what made it worse. No sleek glass, no branding, no polished lobby, just a steel roll-up door, a side entrance with chipped paint, and a faded placard that read Riverpoint Storage Solutions in peeling navy letters. The kind of place people drove past without ever asking what sat inside. Ethan walked toward the side door and pressed the buzzer. A few seconds later, a man in a quilted work vest opened it halfway, confusion already on his face. He was in his late 50s, broad through the middle, with a warehouse badge clipped to his chest that read Frank Dorsey. His eyes moved from Ethan's coat to the SUVs, then to Ava, then back to Ethan again. "We are closed," he said. Ethan held up his phone with the digital authorization Lauren had forced through while they were driving. "You are not closed to me." Frank looked at the screen, and the blood seemed to leave his face in stages. "Mr. Caldwell, I did not know you were coming." Ethan's expression stayed flat. "That much is obvious." Frank opened the door wider at once. Warm, stale air drifted out, heavy with cardboard, dust, and old electronics. "We can turn on the overhead row," he said quickly. "Some of the backlights take a minute." Ethan did not answer. He stepped inside, and the others followed. The warehouse swallowed them in one long breath. Tall racks rose into shadow on both sides, metal shelving stacked with shrink-wrapped pallets, old monitor boxes, crates of cables, and gray plastic bins labeled by hand in black marker. The concrete floor reflected the weak overhead lights in dull streaks. Somewhere far back, a forklift charger clicked softly in the dark. Ava stood just inside the doorway, looking up. Her small face did not show much at first. Only concentration. She was counting rows, reading labels, measuring scale. Ethan saw it happen. He saw the moment her eyes understood the size of the place and the kind of silence that came with stored abundance. Frank cleared his throat. Bay 7 handles overflow and decommission hold. Mostly short-term storage before recycling, resale, or district transfer. Ryan stopped near the nearest rack and pulled a plastic cover aside. Under it sat 6 desktop towers, clean, tagged, and boxed in molded inserts. Newer than the machines Ava described at school. newer by years. His jaw set. Lauren moved to another shelf and read out a label. Education refresh lot. Hold pending approval. Then another. Community pilot. Return units. Functional status unverified. Ava stepped forward, one sneaker scuffing softly against the concrete. What does unverified mean? Frank answered too fast. It means not fully processed yet. Ava looked at the boxes, then at Ethan. Do they work? Frank hesitated. That was enough. Ethan walked to the nearest pallet himself and cut the plastic wrap with a box knife Ryan handed him. The clear film peeled back with a dry ripping sound. Inside were 12 slim desktop units, each with company asset tags still attached. No damage. No dust caked into the vents. No obvious signs of failure. Just machines sitting in the dark because paperwork had somewhere to hide. Ethan picked one up. It was heavier than the scrap Ava had carried all day, but not by much. He turned it and read the service label on the back. Deployment age, 22 months. He looked up slowly. This was supposed to be decommissioned after less than 2 years? Frank shifted his weight. That depends on the initiative cycle, sir. Ryan took another unit from the pallet and checked the memory sticker. 16 gigabytes, he said. Solid-state storage. These are better than half the systems still running in district labs. Monica stood very still beside Ava now, the monitor still in her arms, as if she did not trust herself to speak yet. Ethan walked down the row. More boxes. More labels. More clean equipment sitting under fluorescent hum and procedural neglect. He passed a rack of monitors still sealed in foam. A bin of keyboards in unopened sleeves. Rolling carts stacked with laptops marked cosmetic mismatch. He looked at Lauren. How many so far? She scanned the shelf tags, fingers moving fast over her phone. 187 visible from the first 3 aisles. That does not include upper racks or boxed accessories. Ava did not move for a second. Then she took one slow step toward a lower shelf and touched the edge of a boxed monitor with 2 fingers, almost gently, like she was making sure it was real. These are the good ones, she said. No one corrected her. No one could. The overhead light buzzed. Somewhere deep in the warehouse, metal settled with a low hollow knock. Ethan looked around at the rows of stored usefulness, at the wealth of functions suspended behind words like pending and cycle and hold, and for the first time all night anger arrived clean. Not loud. Not theatrical. Clean. He turned to Frank. Who signed off on keeping these here? Frank swallowed. I would have to pull the chain records. Pull them. Frank hesitated. Tonight. Ethan took one step closer, not aggressive, just exact. Especially tonight. Frank nodded and hurried toward a back office under a hanging exit sign. Ava watched him go, then looked back at the shelves. Her voice was very small when she spoke, and that made it cut deeper. My school does fundraisers for printer paper. Monica closed her eyes for 1 second. Ryan looked down. Lauren stopped typing. Ethan stood in the center of Bay 7, surrounded by enough working machines to change classrooms, libraries, after-school labs, whole blocks of possibility, and understood at last that the ugliest part of waste was not the money. It was the message. Somewhere, in polished rooms filled with polished people, decisions had been made that said children like Ava could wait. That schools like hers could make do. That brilliance without access was still somehow acceptable as long as the report looked clean. Ava reached into her pocket, pulled out her pencil, and opened the notebook against the side of one box tower. Ethan watched her write 4 words in the margin with tight, careful letters. They were always here. Frank disappeared into the back office with the hurried posture of a man who had spent years hiding inside procedure and had just realized procedure could no longer hide him. The door swung shut behind him, and the sound echoed lightly through Bay 7 before being swallowed by the warehouse's vast stale quiet. Ethan stood in the middle of the aisle with Ava's 4 penciled words still hanging in his mind. They were always here. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just exact. The kind of truth that did not need volume because the room itself became proof. Ava closed the notebook and rested it against her chest while looking up at the racks that climbed into shadow. Monica had finally set the monitor down on a clean stretch of pallet wrap near her feet, but she kept one hand on it as if she still expected someone to tell her she could not keep what should have been hers all along. Ryan moved down the row checking service tags, reading dates, muttering numbers under his breath, each one sounding worse than the last. Lauren stood beneath a hanging fluorescent fixture with her phone glowing against her face, sending instructions that no longer sounded like public relations. They sounded like cleanup. Real cleanup. The kind that began after the cameras left and the excuses ran out. Ethan walked to the next pallet and pulled another sheet of plastic back. More desktop towers. More matching monitors. A shrink-wrapped box of unopened keyboards. He looked over his shoulder at Ava. How many computers does your school lab have? Ava thought for a second. 12 that turn on. 9 that work right. Sometimes 10 if the one by the wall is in a good mood. Ryan stopped writing down serial numbers and looked at her. In a good mood? Ava nodded. It freezes if too many kids log in too fast. Mrs. Garvey says to use it one at a time. Monica gave a small weary sigh. Mrs. Garvey is the computer teacher, librarian, and testing coordinator because the district cut support staff last year. Ethan looked at the row of stored monitors beside him and felt the sentence settle beside everything else. Not because he had never heard stories like that. He had. He had funded studies about digital access. He had spoken on panels about equity. He had read reports with clean charts and bad numbers. But reports did not smell like dust and cardboard. Reports did not stand beside him wearing a faded green work jacket with library books in a tote bag. Reports did not have a 9-year-old daughter who rebuilt a computer from scrap because public promises had stalled in a warehouse 12 miles away. The office door opened again. Frank came back carrying a clipboard, a ring of keys, and 3 printed chain of custody packets that trembled slightly in his hands. These are the movement logs, he said, voice drier now. Ethan took the top packet and flipped it open under the fluorescent light. Receiving signatures. Inventory holds. Review codes. Transfer notes. He turned one page, then another. Then he stopped. There was in plain black ink. Reallocation deferred pending brand alignment review. He read the line twice. Not because he had misunderstood it, but because some forms of ugliness still arrived as disbelief before they turned into anger. Brand alignment, he repeated. Frank swallowed. That decision would have come from corporate outreach and communications together, sir. Lauren looked up sharply. Communications? Frank nodded without meeting her eyes. The note says school placements were paused until the next campaign cycle because mixed-generation devices photographed inconsistently across pilot locations. Ryan let out a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite disgust. Monica stared at Frank as if she had run out of patience even for surprise. Ava looked from face to face, then at Ethan. They kept them because they did not match? No one answered right away. That was answer enough. Ava lowered her eyes to the notebook in her arms. At our school, she said softly. The chairs do not match either. Ethan closed the packet with more force than he intended. The crack of paper against clipboard carried through the aisle. Not rage. Precision. The kind that had built his company in the first place when he still believed competence and conscience belonged in the same room. He turned to Lauren, who signed the brand review hold. Lauren was already scanning the line items from a photo she had taken. Her face lost color by degrees. Executive outreach. Final approval routed through the office of the vice president. Ethan held out his hand. Name. Lauren looked up from the screen. Daniel Mercer. Ethan said nothing for a second. Daniel had been with the company 11 years. Thoughtful in meetings. Good with donors. Always ready with a phrase that made neglect sound strategic. Ethan had trusted him because polished people are often easiest to trust from a distance. Ava bent and set her notebook on top of one of the box towers. Then she opened it and wrote another sentence beneath the first. They matched the boxes, not the kids. Ethan saw it upside down and felt something in his chest tighten with shame, so clean, it almost felt like grief. Monica stepped closer to her daughter and rested a hand lightly between Ava's shoulders. Baby, she said, very quietly. You do not have to write all of it down. Ava kept her pencil in place. Yes, I do, she said, because they wrote their reasons down too. The warehouse went still again after that. Even Frank stopped shifting. Even Ryan stopped scanning tags. Ethan looked at the child in front of him and understood with humiliating clarity that while his company had been documenting delays, preserving image, and protecting language, Ava had been doing the harder work. She had been keeping score for the truth. He turned to Lauren, and when he spoke his voice was low enough that nobody needed to wonder whether he meant it. Call Daniel Mercer. Put him on speaker. Right now. Lauren did not hesitate. She tapped Daniel Mercer's number, and turned the volume all the way up until the ringing spread thin and metallic through the cold warehouse air. Once, twice, 3 times. No one moved while they waited. Ava stood beside the box towers with her notebook open against the cardboard, pencil resting in the seam of the page. Monica kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder, not to hold her back, just to remind herself she was there. Ryan remained a few feet away with a clipboard tucked against his chest, his eyes lowered now in the particular silence of a man watching his own profession fail in real time. Frank stayed near the office door, small somehow despite his size, as if the rows of stored machines had begun leaning toward him with accusation. On the fourth ring, the line clicked. Daniel Mercer. His voice came through clean, polished, faintly distracted. The voice of a man still standing in warm light somewhere, probably believing the world around him was under control. Daniel, Lauren said, her tone flat. You are on speaker with Ethan. A pause. Then a shift. Ethan? I heard the event ran long. We were going to regroup first thing in the morning. Ethan looked out over the shelves before answering, at the boxed monitors, the tagged desktops, the silent inventory of delay. Where are you right now? Daniel gave a short exhale that sounded almost like a smile, trying to remain professional. At the convention center. The board is asking whether you are returning for a private donor dinner. Ethan's face did not change. I am at Riverpoint Industrial Park. Bay 7. Silence. Not long. Just enough to reveal thought moving behind Daniel's careful voice. I see. Ethan took one of the packets from the pallet and read the line again, even though he knew it by heart now. Did you authorize the hold on school redistribution for brand alignment review? Another pause. This one longer. I approved the recommendation as part of a broader campaign strategy, Daniel said at last. Those placements were intended to support a more cohesive public rollout. Ava looked up at the phone as if the voice itself had become a thing she could inspect. Monica's jaw tightened. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Ethan asked the next question without raising his voice. Did you know Eastbrook District filed 3 replacement requests in 14 months? I know a number of districts submitted requests during the hold window. That was not my question. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the back of the warehouse, a relay clicked. Daniel inhaled. Yes, he said. I was aware of the requests. Ava's pencil moved once across the page. Ethan saw it. And you still approve the hold. Daniel shifted to the language polished men used when they needed the shape of justification more than the substance. Ethan, these decisions are never made in isolation. There were optics considerations, inventory balancing, donor expectations, rollout sequencing. We had to think about the larger impact. Ava frowned slightly. What does optics mean? No one answered immediately. Daniel heard the child's voice through the speaker and went quiet for one beat too long. Then he asked, Who is that? Ethan did not take his eyes off the shelves. A 9-year-old girl who rebuilt a working computer from scrap because your larger impact left better machines sitting in boxes 12 miles from her school. This time the silence on the line was complete. No shuffle of papers. No smooth interruption. Nothing. When Daniel finally spoke again, the polish had thinned. I did not know there was a child standing in a salvage aisle when I signed a campaign memo. Ava looked down at her notebook and said, almost to herself, but he knew there were kids. Monica's hand pressed gently against her daughter's shoulder. Ryan let out a breath that sounded tired down to the bone. Ethan felt Daniel hear that sentence, because the silence afterward turned from strategic to human. How many districts were paused? Ethan asked. Daniel answered more quietly now. 17. How many units? Across all holds? Approximately 1,100. Frank lowered his head. Lauren's fingers tightened around the phone. Monica stared at the shelves as if she could suddenly see beyond this building to every classroom that had been told to wait. Ava did not look shocked. That was somehow worse. She looked like the answer fit something she had already suspected. Ethan asked one final question. Why was I never briefed? Daniel's reply came slower this time, stripped of shine. Because it was framed as a communications optimization issue, not an education access failure. It did not rise to your direct review. Ethan almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just recognition. This was how harm survived inside successful systems. Not through monsters. Through vocabulary. Through distance. Through layers of people who learned to rename delay until delay no longer sounded cruel. Ava wrote another line in the notebook, and when Ethan glanced down, he read it upside down in careful pencil letters. Grown-ups make waiting sound organized. Daniel heard the rustle of paper through the speaker. Ethan, he said, voice unsteady now in a way Ethan had never heard before. I can come there. We can sort this out in person. Ethan looked around the warehouse one more time, at the boxes, the dust, the stored usefulness, the child with the pencil, the mother who still had not allowed herself relief. Then he answered with a calm that felt more final than anger. No, you are going to stay exactly where you are. Daniel went silent. Ethan continued, because in 10 minutes, every donor in that private dinner is going to see a live inventory feed from Base 7, along with the hold memo, the district request log, and the names attached to both. And for once, Daniel, the optics can work for the children instead of against them. After Ethan ended the call, the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The phone screen dimmed in Lauren's hand. Somewhere near the back wall, the charger on an idle forklift clicked once and went quiet again. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. There was too much in it now. Too much paper. Too many boxes. Too many years of delay dressed up as planning. Ava stood with her notebook open against the cardboard tower and looked at Ethan not with admiration, not even with surprise, but with the same steady attention she gave broken machines when she was deciding whether they could still be saved. Monica kept her hand between Ava's shoulders, but the tension in her fingers had changed. It was no longer the tension of someone bracing for dismissal. It was the tension of someone standing at the edge of proof and not yet knowing what proof could really change. Ryan broke the silence first. I can have a functional assessment team here by midnight, he said. If we divide by model year, we could image the drives, replace the dead batteries, and prep the first school batch before sunrise. Ethan looked at him. How many units can move tonight? Ryan glanced down the aisle, calculating. If Base 7 is only one part of the hold inventory, I do not want to overpromise. But from what we can already see, 50 desktop stations with monitors, keyboards, and mice. Maybe more if the upper racks match the lower ones. Ava lowered her pencil and asked the question before anyone else could. How many classrooms is that? Ryan turned toward her. His voice softened without becoming childish. About 4 full labs. Or more if the schools use carts and rotate. Ava nodded slowly, doing the math somewhere behind her eyes. Eastbrook could use 1, she said. And the library on Gladstone. Their sign-in computer restarts by itself. Monica gave a quiet breath through her nose, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. Ethan heard the sentence for what it was. Not a request. A map. Ava was already distributing the room in her mind because she had been living inside Need long enough to recognize it on sight. Lauren's phone buzzed again and again in her hand. Messages stacking from the convention center, from the board, from legal, from people suddenly realizing the story had moved somewhere they could not stage manage. She turned the screen over without checking it. The donor dinner feed can go live in under 5 minutes, she said. Do you want just inventory visuals and documents? Or do you want a statement attached? Ethan looked down the aisle at the rows of boxed computers disappearing into shadow. He thought of the stage he had left behind. The banner. The polished lights. The words he had once trusted because they sounded like motion. Then he looked at Ava's notebook. At the careful pencil lines. At the pages where a child had recorded the truth more honestly than his entire communications department. No statement yet, he said. Send the feed first. Let them sit with the shelves before I give them language. Lauren nodded once. Frank shifted near the office door, still holding the clipboard, his face pale under the warehouse light. Mr. Caldwell, he said carefully. If these units are moved tonight, I will need release signatures for every pallet. Ava looked up. Then do not waste time talking. Frank blinked, then lowered his eyes almost instantly. Monica pressed her lips together to hide the flicker of pride trying to rise through her caution. Ryan did not hide his. Ethan saw it, and, for the first time that evening, did not mind that someone else in the room was looking at Ava the way a person looks at rare talent. Because this time it was not spectacle. It was respect. Ethan stepped toward the nearest pallet and pulled a marker from Frank's clipboard. On the plastic wrap covering the first stack of box towers, he wrote in large black letters, Eastbrook District, release now. Then he turned to the next pallet and wrote, Public Library Partnership, release now. On the third, City Youth Labs, release now. The marker squeaked against plastic in the cold air, each word plain and blunt and impossible to rebrand. Ava watched every letter. Can I do one? She asked. Ethan handed her the marker without hesitation. She took it in both hands, walked to a smaller stack of laptops marked cosmetic mismatch, and carefully printed in neat block letters across the wrapping. Kids do not care if it matches. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Ryan let out a breath that turned into the ghost of a laugh. Not mocking, not light, just human in a room that had forgotten how to be. Monica covered her mouth briefly and looked away, as if emotion still felt too expensive to spend freely. Lauren glanced down at her phone, then back up. The feed is live, she said. The donor dinner screens just changed. Ethan imagined the room back at the convention center going still in exactly the way this one had gone still around Ava's first repaired machine. He imagined polished people staring at warehouse shelves instead of centerpieces, at hold memos instead of menu cards, at the physical shape of neglect instead of another speech. Good, he thought. Let them look. Ava capped the marker and handed it back. What happens now? She asked. Ethan met her eyes. In the distance, another relay clicked on and more overhead lights flickered awake above the upper racks, revealing even more boxed machines stretching deeper into bay. 7 than any of them had first seen. He followed the new rows into the light, then looked back at Ava. Now, he said quietly, we find out how much of this city was told to wait when it never had to. The new lights hummed on above the upper racks, and Bay 7 opened wider than any of them had expected, row after row of boxed machines rising out of shadow like a truth that had finally run out of places to hide. Ava stood in the center of the aisle with the black marker still warm in her hand, her small gray hoodie hanging loose around her wrists, her braids tipped with blue beads that caught the warehouse light every time she turned her head. She looked up at the shelves, then down at her notebook, then back at Ethan Caldwell, and for the first time all night, there was something in her face that was not only focus. It was sadness, not dramatic sadness, not the kind adults perform when cameras are near, the quiet kind, the kind that comes when a child discovers she was right about the world in a way no child should have to be. Men in work jackets began arriving from the loading bays, called in by Ryan and operations, rolling pallet jacks across the concrete, while clipboards changed hands and labels were checked under bright fluorescent glare. The warehouse no longer felt frozen. It felt awake. But under the movement, the truth remained still and heavy. These machines had not been lost. They had been withheld. Monica watched the workers move into place, then looked at the words Ava had written across the laptop palette. Kids do not care if it matches. Her throat moved once before she spoke. You hear grown people say things long enough, and after a while you start thinking maybe there really is some reason things never come through. Ethan turned toward her. Monica kept her eyes on the shelves. Maybe the forms were wrong. Maybe the money was not there. Maybe somebody higher up knows something you do not. That is how it works. You make peace with being told to wait, because waiting sounds cleaner than being told no. Ava rested her notebook against the boxed tower beside her. But it was just boxes, she said quietly. Monica looked down at her daughter and smoothed one hand over the top of her braid. Yes, baby, she said, voice thin now. It was just boxes. Ethan looked away because shame, when it finally came honest, did not always ask permission before it settled in the chest. He thought of the stage he had left behind. The donor dinner, now staring at live warehouse feeds. Daniel Mercer standing in some bright room realizing language had stopped protecting him. But none of that felt as sharp as this moment. A mother and her daughter standing 12 miles from a school that needed computers, looking at rows of working machines that had been kept still for image. He had built systems powerful enough to move products across oceans in days. Yet somehow this city had let a child scavenge for parts while better answers sat under dust and fluorescent lights. Ryan walked back toward them carrying a printed release sheet and a set of new inventory labels. His expression had lost the stiffness of earlier hours. Now it held something rarer. Humility. The first truck can leave in 30 minutes, he said. Eastbrook gets 20 stations tonight if the district custodian can open the lab. Lauren checked her phone. I already reached the superintendent. He is on his way with keys. Ava blinked. Tonight. Lauren nodded. Tonight. Ava looked from Lauren to Ryan to Ethan, as if testing whether the word meant what it usually failed to mean. Ethan held her gaze. Tonight, he said again. A worker pushed an empty pallet jack past them, wheels rattling over a seam in the concrete. Another cut open a stack of monitor boxes and started checking screens under the brighter row of overhead lights. Frank, now moving faster than before, handed out chain forms and location stickers with the energy of a man trying to outrun his own part in the story. Beyond the open loading door, the night had deepened into black glass and sodium light. But inside Base 7, things were finally going the right direction. Ava opened her notebook to a clean page. She did not write right away. She only stood there listening to the sounds of release. Tape tearing, plastic wrap ripping, forklift beeps in reverse, men calling out counts, real motion, the kind no speech could imitate. Ethan stepped closer to the pallet she had marked and knelt so he was level with her. For the first time that day, the concrete was cold through the fabric of his trousers, but he stayed there anyway. Ava, he said, and the name sounded different now in his own mouth, stripped of novelty, full of respect. I need to tell you something. She looked at him calmly. Okay. Ethan glanced at the notebook in her hands. You were right before any of us were willing to be. About the fair, about the school, about all of this. Ava listened without interrupting. I thought I was building the future for kids, he continued, the words slow now because they had to be earned. But you made me see that I was letting people package it instead. That is not the same thing. Ava lowered her eyes for 1 second, then looked back at him. Are you going to fix it? It was the simplest question anyone had asked him in years, and because it was simple, there was nowhere to hide. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Ava studied his face with the same clear attention she had given broken hardware all day, as if she were checking for false signals, loose wires, cosmetic polish over failing parts. Then she asked, all the way? Ethan felt that one in his ribs. Around them, workers lifted boxes, labeled carts, opened paths that should never have been closed. He looked over his shoulder at the rows disappearing into light, at Monica standing beside the monitor with tired hope finally visible on her face, at Lauren coordinating real change instead of managing optics, at Ryan checking each unit, like usefulness itself had become personal. Then Ethan turned back to Ava and answered the only way the moment would accept. All the way. Ava considered him for another second. Then she nodded, small and certain, and wrote one final line in her notebook before closing it. Ethan did not need to ask what it said. She turned the page outward just enough for him to see the pencil words in neat, careful print. Do not call it help if it was already theirs. The sentence sat between them, gentle and devastating. Ethan rose slowly from the cold floor, not as the man who had walked into the tech fair that afternoon smiling at a child beside a pile of scrap, but as someone forced, at last, to remember what decency actually required. Outside, the first loading truck backed toward Bay 7 with a long soft hiss of brakes. Inside, under the warehouse lights, Ava picked up the rebuilt computer she had made from other people's leftovers and held it close against her chest. It was still humming, still warm, still alive. Ethan watched her small hands around that salvaged machine and understood the real reversal had never been about a billionaire being embarrassed by a brilliant little girl. It was about a little girl standing in the middle of a broken system and refusing to let anyone call waste normal ever again. And as the dock doors opened wider to the Detroit night and the first pallet rolled toward release, the light fell across Ava's face, across Monica's tired eyes, across the cardboard boxes finally moving. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell did not want a camera or a headline or even forgiveness. He only wanted the trucks to keep going until every child who had been told to wait could hear the sound of something arriving at last.